Okay, so basically now, here's our slot. We've got our truss rod sitting in here nicely. I've got a slightly wider section which I put in with the chisel here, which is for the Allen key that goes here. These are installed with the Allen key adjuster down, not up, very important. And then I pull this out with a gouge, so we've got an area here which will be the Allen key access. And then I wrapped some sandpaper around a piece of dowel and just rubbed it smooth. So we've got quite a nice looking thing here. Now when the fingerboard goes on, of course, you'll have this left over. And what will happen is I'll put a maple piece in here so that the truss rod is put in tightly. Still, this face has to be planed down, but we are getting closer and closer to a neck. Alright, for now this gets put aside. So I decided, after working with the woods for a little while, that I was going to switch to a rosewood fingerboard. And the reason I decided to do that is because when I tapped a bunch of woods, as the neck and the body emerged, I thought that the tonality of rosewood would actually be a better match. So I've got this rosewood blank sitting here. It's Indian rosewood. It's quite a nice blank. And as you can see, it's set up in something called a shooting board. Now what this means is I've got a high step here, I've got a low step here, and the plane is here. The idea is that the plane runs along like that at 90 degrees to the board, and it takes off a shaving like that. And what this is doing is establishing a very, very flat side here, which is going to be my reference side for the rest of the work that I do. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm planing the fingerboard blank. When the blanks come from the supplier, they generally have saw marks, chatter marks, and all sorts of other things. They're also quite thick. So what you need to do is plane it, getting fine shavings, to get a nice flat surface. This is the surface that I'll be gluing, actually, so this is the surface I'm working on first. And you can see this area is being planed, this area is flat still. You just keep working it, taking off fine shavings, gradually getting lower and lower. You're getting out the saw marks, but you're also thinning the blank itself, because when these come from the suppliers, they almost all are between 8 and 10 mil thick, and of course what you want is about 6 mil thick. So you're going to need to plane away a couple of millimeters. Now we're getting a lovely consistent surface here. It's nice, clean and flat. You might also see pale patches on my bench. That's because one of the things I do when I do this type of work, oh wow, that's really good. One of the things I do when I do this type of work is I actually plane the top of my bench, the wooden top, so that I've got a flat surface to attach things to. And this was attached with a couple of bits of double stick tape. So here is my prepped fretboard. It's been planed to the correct thickness. It's a little thick, but that'll come sanding down when the radius is put in. And now what I've done is I've put a center line on, which is relative to this straight edge that I prepared before, and I've marked each of the fret positions plus my top line and a cut-off point down here. I've aligned it with the grain, and I've tapped the wood, and I found the bits of it which sound the best. This part sounds a little loose grained, so I didn't want it on the board, and this part is nice, solid and clean. Now what I do, as I say, I've put it on this board. It goes into this, which is a fret cutting jig. This true edge gets held here, and the saw goes in here. So, if I can show how a fret works, what I do is I come in, I center my saw over the fret mark, checking that it's exactly on. And when it is, with a few cuts of my Japanese saw, I have a beautiful, clean fret slot. One down, 21 to go. Now it's time to trim the sides down. Now I've done something that I don't actually recommend to people, especially when you're starting out a build, because it's a very good way to ruin a ruler and to ruin plane blade. But if you know what you're doing, it is possible. So what I've done is I've actually drawn the edge of the fingerboard line on, and I've clamped a ruler to that line, and I'm going to plane down and try and come close to the ruler without touching it. It means I can't be inattentive. Now this is quite a fast job, and I need to keep kind of a constant reference, check that I'm going at 90 degrees. But basically, using a block plane, a low angle block plane, and you can open the mouth up a little bit, lower the blade a touch, you can take off quite serious shavings and get closer and closer to your final profile. As you get close to that line, where you eventually want to be, that's when you can switch to something like a longer plane, a number 4, 5 or 6 Stanley, for example, which will ensure that you get a long, straight line. So here we can see our neck blank, and on top of it is sitting the fingerboard blank. You can see some really beautiful grain here that's come out. It's absolutely lovely. And I'm expecting some other parts to come out. There's a bit down here as well. And there's some grain hiding in the middle here when this fingerboard is polished and radiused and all that stuff. I've put some Power Abalone 4mm dots on there. I tend to prefer my dots offset up towards the top. This is roughly where they're going to go. I'm just getting an idea of how they're going to look. All the fret slots are done, the angling is done. It's basically ready to go. So what's going to happen next, I'm going to plane the top of the neck here. When that's done, I'll re-establish my center line, and I'll put in a small piece of maple here, and I'll install my truss rod. Then, with that in place, the neck and the fingerboard will be glued and clamped together. The idea behind this, of course, is that that will give me a very strong joint, and I can shape the neck and the fingerboard together. And also it allows me to radius the fingerboard while it's on the neck, which gives me a more stable platform, and it means that the radiusing of the fingerboard will be relative to the flatness of the neck, not the flatness of the fingerboard itself. And then when I fret it, the frets again will be pushing in and keeping the neck nice and flat. So the whole thing, I find if you do it this way, the whole thing is a lot better. Most people construct their fingerboards and then attach them to their necks, and I've done it that way, but I never feel happy doing it. So after that's done, the neck gets profiled, the headstock gets done, the head plate goes on, the inlay goes on, and the neck itself gets carved, and I'll shape my tenon. And once that's done, the neck is basically ready to go, and it can be put aside, and I can turn my attentions to the body.